Thank you. Mr. Schultz, welcome to the heartland of America.
Thank you very much.
How would you characterize the situation at our southern border and immigration system overall? And at whatever level of urgency you describe it, what specifically would you do in order to solve it? And particularly in your case, if you were to win the White House, you'd be a third-party candidate. How would you work with the two parties in order to implement what you've got in mind?
So given what's happening at our southern border, this is such an important question. I think it's a question of humanity and certainly a question about legal immigration. I want to say a few things in order to frame my answer. I don't know how many people are aware in this audience, but President Bush, 43, and President Obama, both, while they were president, submitted to Congress an immigration bill. In both cases, the opposition took that bill, rejected it, and would not pass it. Now, if I took those two bills today and I showed everyone in this audience, this is one bill and this is the other, aside from President Bush's bill, which had a guest worker program, no one in this audience would be able to tell Republican versus Democrat. So why didn't it work? It did not work because the other party was unwilling to provide the president and his party a victory. And that is the problem that existed then, and that is the problem that existed now. I can promise you that Nancy Pelosi, under any circumstances, will not give President Trump a victory on immigration. Now, in terms of the answer to the question, I have gone down to the southern border, to McAllen, Texas. I've seen it firsthand, and I want to share with you what I saw. And what I saw, in my mind, is a fracturing of American values and a fracturing of humanity. We should not be stripping mothers and fathers from their children, and we should not do anything that even comes close to what happened a long time ago, where we put people in internment camps. That's what it reminded me of. Now, the issue that we have to recognize is this. President Trump is correct, and the Republican leadership is correct, that we need fierce, strict levels of control on that border to keep bad people from coming in. Illegal immigrants should not come in. I don't want to get into a wall or anything, but I agree we should fund whatever we need to do to secure the border. I get that. Now, the humanity issue. No, one more thing. The Democrats are not correct. We should be funding ICE and giving them all the tools and resources they need to secure the borders and arrest the bad people. Whatever they need, give them all the resources. But when it comes to the dreamers, this is where I have a problem with the Republicans. Our country is based on immigration. Almost everyone in this room is here because someone came before us. In my heart, the dreamers should be given a pathway to immigration. Now we have the second issue, 11 to 12 million people who are here unauthorized. What should we do with them? Many of them are here because they came here and their visa expired. They didn't cross the border. We just need a better visa process. We're not going to send 11 million people back. Now, it takes 7 years to get a green card and get legal immigration, become a citizen. Let's find a pathway for them. And then lastly, the Republicans and this president has weaponized this issue, as has the Democrats. In my heart, I believe they would rather have this as an issue to fight over than to solve for the American people.
Yeah.
Now,
let me just finish to his point. It is a crisis. Is that what you're calling it?
It is a crisis, but it can be solved. It cannot be solved currently because of the ideology of both parties. But if I was fortunate enough to become president, this is what I can promise you. I'm about accountability. I'm about results. I would bring the people into the room. I would say, you cannot come in here with ideology or ego. What I want to do is I want to put an empty chair in the room, and that chair represents the American people. And we're not going to leave the room until we solve the problem for the American people. The problem that we have with both parties, the American people are not in the room. I'll tell you who's in the room. Self-interest, ideology, self-preservation, and their ability to get reelected. They spend more time on both sides raising money to get reelected than they do solving our problems. It's time to change.
All right. We're going to see some...
President Trump and powerful establishment globalist forces are, well, in the U.S. southern border. The radical Dems, Rhino Republicans, the establishment of both parties, K Street and Wall Street, all in full-out assault against President Trump and our national sovereignty. These groups demand the president capitulate to their demands of open borders, open migration, and to preserve their status quo. Their status quo. The president saying his threats to shut down the border are paying off and that Mexico is already paying attention.
So if we don't see people apprehended and brought back to their countries, if we see these massive caravans coming up to our country right through Mexico, coming right through Mexico like nothing. Buses are even given to them. For the last 3 days it hasn't happened since I said we're closing the border.
We're at a pivotal moment and uncertain moment, certainly, in our nation's history. And history is always made when outcomes are far from certain. We are fortunate, blessed to have a president who was made for such times. Joining me tonight to take up the president's bold leadership in the wake of the national emergency at our southern border, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton. Tom, good to have you with us. This is an extraordinary moment, in part because all of these forces arrayed against the president are now public and publicly battling him. They're battling against the interest of national security and indeed the interest of the nation and in favor of their own. Your thoughts?
You know, this is a remarkable time in the sense, at least the president, for the first time in a generation, we have a president who's talking sensibly about solving the border crisis. What's remarkable is, given the crisis, the existential threat that's at the border right now, the lack of action here in Washington, D.C. to deal with it other than out of the White House. And it shows you that the left, and as you point out, the establishment Republicans don't see this as a crisis. They see it as an opportunity. They're happy to have it go on. They're happy to have the system broken to, again, allow for open borders ultimately and a mass amnesty for those here illegally. That's the goal here. So it isn't a question of what type of security we have at the border. It's a question of whether we're going to have an open border and a massive amnesty. And, you know, in my view, the president needs to take a much more aggressive tack on the border in the sense of deploying the military on the border to secure our interests there. And they can make sure commercial traffic that is legitimate continues to flow back and forth. But they will secure the border in places our civilian personnel have been unable to do. And of course there are other reforms that the DHS can undertake that they really are incapable of undertaking absent presidential direction. That he should be pushing them back with. Look, and the other dirty little secret is Mexico doesn't control, the Mexican government doesn't control large swaths of its territory. The border region with the United States is not controlled by the Mexican government. It's controlled by the drug cartels. And the president's considering this, and he should pull the trigger and label these cartels for what they are, foreign terrorist organizations, which will allow a whole host of other activity be used against them to protect our interests.
Yeah, the president has been preeminent, foremost in bringing national attention to the opioid crisis, the tens of thousands of American deaths every year that result, and all of those drugs, the majority of methamphetamine, marijuana, cocaine, fentanyl, you name it, come across that border. All under, of course, the auspices of the major drug cartels of Mexico, which has made Mexico the murder capital of the world, for crying out loud. Right. And this president is the only president in my lifetime to have said directly and forthrightly that the drug cartels will be defeated in this battle.
Well, that's right. And, you know, in many ways, the border isn't even at the border with Mexico, Texas and California and Arizona and such. Our border effectively is between Mexico and Guatemala. I mean, that's where the battle is. That's where it needs to be stopped. And if the
I
Mexican
wish that were more true, Tom. I take your point, but those people dying are in this country. Those people who are living with the violence committed by illegal immigrants are in this country.
Well, the cartels use these people from Guatemala and Honduras and elsewhere as a vehicle to get those drugs into the country. We have to stop the flows, the human trafficking operations, and the drug flows are contingent on these human trafficking operations. As our Border Patrol is shut down, dealing with hundreds of these so-called family units, elsewhere the drugs are coming in unimpeded.
One of the
so we've got to deploy the military to take care of this. Our civilian personnel have been overwhelmed, and the history of our country, at least with Mexico, is that where the military ordinarily has been protecting the border. It's an outlier recently. The recent civilian control of the border is an outlier historically in our dealings with Mexico.
Yeah, in talking with White House sources today, there is no doubt that a plan for a more aggressive approach to turn the tide that they certainly recognize better than anyone that is working against the national interests and against the American people. They are building that right now.
And go ahead. And the attack is simultaneous. It's going on at the border. The establishment is allowing this to take place. And then you've got the fights here in Washington where the effort to remove and overthrow the president is being enabled and continuing out of Congress in allegiance with the Mueller operation. You know, our republic is on the brink these days, folks.
And this president is the only president, I think this is correct, since, you know, Andy Jackson to stand up and campaign directly against a corrupt establishment, a deep state, and they are fighting back with everything they have, and it's in public view now in this battle, as I said at the outset, to determine the future of the nation. I want to turn to one of the most frustrating aspects for the Border Patrol and all responsible for border security, and that's the catch and release program. Do you have thoughts about what can be done to fix that forthwith?
Well, the Border Patrol can be enabled to consider asylum claims. That can speed it up. One of the things that's happening at the border, my understanding, is they just let people in. They process as many as possible in a day, and of course the system is overwhelmed. But if you know you have only so many beds or so much capacity to detain these fraudsters, then you shut down the border once you reach the daily limit. Right. If you only have room for 2 more people to come in through a particular border point, you shut it down. These asylum laws can be enforced, but they're not a suicide pact, and that's why the president should direct the DHS to manage the border better. It's not happening. DHS is doing yeoman's work in many respects, but they're unimaginative in dealing with the crisis, and this is where the president needs to bring his special outlook, because frankly he's a one-man show in terms of this being entrepreneurial and figuring out solutions and taking advantage of a different approach that the deep state and the establishment, even good thinking people here in Washington, can't think through.
Yeah, I want to turn. I can't have you here without talking to you about this. The New York Times resurrecting anonymous sources to bring this business about Barr misinterpreting the Mueller report. Yeah, I've given sort of my reaction to the idea of the Times' use of anonymous sources for this kind of spurious nonsense. Your thoughts about the Times reporting and whatever, if there is any substance to that you discerned in that report?
Well, you know, Barr blew up the conspiracy of the Mueller people to smear the president. through this report. They weren't expecting Barr to be effective and efficient in analyzing the report, seeing through the gamesmanship with the obstruction of justice, and getting the key details out to the American people. So they're angry about that. They were hoping the report would be
darlings. Poor
That's
darlings.
right. And so they've got this dossier, especially related to the smears related to obstruction that they want the House Democrats to use to try to overthrow and impeach the president.
Please.
And so this is all the spin related to that.
This is
look, this
is
report's going to.
appalling. It is such
That's right.
drivel. It is unworthy of whatever the Times once was, and the Dems have exposed them for themselves for what they are.
You know,
and that is
I
nasty, vicious, venomous, anti-Trump activists who have no other purpose apparently in their political lives. You get the last word real quickly, please.
I want Mr. Mueller, I want Mr. Weissman, I want the rest to testify. One thing I want to know is why, once they figured out there was no Russia collusion a year ago, they let this hang over the president and hold back this report, seemingly to help the Democrats win in November.
Because, Tom, it was their purpose from the outset.
Amen.
It was, after all, as you know, a witch hunt. Tom, thanks so much. Great to see you. Thanks for being here.
You
Tom
too.
Fitton, Judicial Watch.